square in the corner suggesting it's recording right now.
That's right.
This call is being streamed publicly and might be recorded.
Might be recorded. Right. So I just want to be 100% sure. Yeah. I assume all of that is being recorded. Okay. In any case, I say we just get right into it. And the first thing that I wanted to do is, because you have a tendency, you know, when I ask you about your background and stuff, and then you start chatting, I'm usually, this guy, my goodness, he's such a boaster. He's such a boaster with all his accomplishments. And then when I actually see your accomplishments, I'm like, no, the guy's very modest. He's yourself, right? More.
That's funny. Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just going to go through a list of some of the things that you've accomplished, and I think it's very impressive. And well, some things that are quite notable, aside from having a very long history, I would say 40 years are we talking about of history, the jazz dance?
Yeah, I guess it's more than 40 now. It's like since I started in, what is it, 83 going into 84.
83, right, 1983. And there's quite a few things even within that field that you've done, which does include also, what was it? You were a Lindy Hop champion, two-time American swing dance champion, first winner of the Lindy Hop division of the U.S. Open. Yeah. And I think among many things, you also did did many great shows that are still, for me to this day, epic within the Lindy Hop world, including like the Frankie Manning Centennial. Was it 100? Was that the one?
I don't know. Pick one.
The one you did Hell's a Poppin', and you were Frankie. You were doing the Frankie part.
Oh, that was Frankie 95. That was
95 even. Yeah, and that, to me, that remains legendary. There's a popular dance that you choreographed that, when I go to Asia, all of them are doing it, but also all around the world, and it's the Jitterbug Stroll, 1992. It's been around for a long time. And the list could go on and on and on. But I think what's also very impressive is all the accomplishments outside of the Lindy Hop world and jazz world, and which, to my understanding, I think has also contributed in bringing more, has brought the dance and the art form to a broader audience. And I think there's no way diminishing that. And one of those is, like, for example, Strictly Come Dancing. So you think you can dance the UK Series 1, the UK Series 2.
Yeah. They only had 2 series, so
we only had 2 series, but nevertheless, you also had your dance companies, Swing Extreme, Suits and Spangles, which I'd love to talk about.
Yeah.
And you also associate choreographer and star performer in the Broadway musical Swing.
Yeah, that's what I have to say, kind of like officially.
Right. We could also, yeah, I know the story, but for sure. And you did TV shows, Dancing on Ice, Britain's Got Talent. You were in movies like Malcolm X, Swing Kids. Swing Kids was absolutely, of course, epic. And Malcolm X as well. Polar Express, Idlewild, Lackawanna Blues. Choreographed and appeared at the 2000 Tony Awards on Radio City. And the list goes on. And you're also a patron of the Byrd College for the Performing Arts. And on the advisory board of the Tired movement.
Yes.
So I think, like, I mean, I think all these things, it's good. It goes, the list goes on, and I know you're also working on other major projects, um, but it's not just, you're not just within this jazz and Lindy Hop scene, as we would call it. It's been much broader than that over the decades. So rather than, I'd like to go into
Yeah.
straight
Sorry,
into,
we're a little bit.
yeah. I'd like to go into asking you a question, Ryan, is how did a kid, we'll call it like that, in 1983 get into swing, jazz, Lindy Hop? How did that even start? And had you been dancing prior to that?
Well, that tends to be the question that's always asked, actually. But no, I didn't dance before Lindy Hop. I didn't dance, period. I wasn't even a sort of like casual disco dancer or anything like that. It just didn't happen that way. If anything, I was a singer. I had a singing voice, so I was a chorister at Southwark Cathedral Choir. I had a soprano voice, quite talented in that department, but not dancing. The story as it goes, if I try to make it quick, I was in school and I did a lot of sports, pretty much every sport, actually, when I think about it. But one of the sports that I focused on was judo, and I was pretty much a judo champion. I was working my way into the British team. I was already in the London team. And my instructor, one of them was also my cousin. He met a guy called Terry Monahan, and I actually worked for him at the Polytechnic, East London Polytechnic. And Terry was researching the World War. That was his pet subject. And in doing the research, he stumbled upon, he wanted to know what actually Black Americans were doing in the black community during the Second World War socially. And he stumbled upon this thing called the Lindy Hop. Coincidentally, around that time, there was a documentary made in the UK called The South Bank Show that was hosted by, the host presenter's name was Melvin Bragg. And each episode would be focused on something unusual. And they decided to focus on this woman called Mama Lou Parks and the Lou Parks dancers, who was spearheading what would be considered a sort of kind of like sustaining of this dance called the Lindy Hop and bringing it to young Black, teenagers and basically everyone in the kind of like Harlem community. And so this documentary was shown in the UK, and it kind of sparked Terry also to want to know even more about this dance called the Lindy Hop. So they were very pragmatic. He got together a friend of his, Warren Hayes, who was a ballroom dance kind of champion. And they pragmatically worked out that they could maybe recreate this dance if they found a bunch of young, healthy Black kids to see some of the films that they'd collected, which was like A Day at the Races, essentially, and Stormy Weather. If they would get them to watch the clips and see if they could, recreate the dance. And since they needed some healthy young black kids, and it turned out that my judo instructor was working at the same polytechnic, he offered up his judo, uh, exponents to see if they could come in and do this Lindy Hop class and see if we could work out how to do the dance from the videos. So it was promoted to, when I was young, when you went to school, you had after school activities, which we would do in what we call a youth center. And now you pay for after school activities where now you do sports and so on. But back then it was all subsidized. So after school, I would go do judo, I would play basketball, badminton, table tennis, you name it. I was out there doing that like virtually every day. And so on the billboard, like there's, a board that was just advertising stuff in the kind of recreation room after school, there was a little poster and it said, "Learn to Lindy Hop, 1930s dancing with judo throws." And the intention was to just kind of convince us to kind of join this class, knew who they were going for. And I of course, I saw judo throws. I'd been encouraged by the instructor to go take this class, but they had another, let's call it enticement. They put all the best looking girls in our school in that room and told us we could dance with them, which back then, like even coming close to a girl was kind of difficult. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a go. So I went into this room with Warren and Terry, realized very quickly that like they really didn't know, they didn't have anything to show us. They just put on this kind of like jazz music. At the time, I was not even really conscious of what jazz music was. For me, it was music for old movies and for when you go up and down in the lift, and so they're playing this music and trying to show us what I eventually understood was what you call a swing out, or I call a Lindy turn. And it was the first thing that I found that like I couldn't do instantly. And I was surprised. I thought dancing would be easy. And so my body was doing one thing while my mind was saying, hey, come on, that's an easy thing to do. And so I kept going because I really was kind of brought in by the challenge of finding something that I couldn't do immediately. After a very short time, a matter of weeks, we were shown a day at the races for the first time. And basically, seeing a day at the races was the turning point for me, which made me choose to do this thing more. Because I had been brought up in a very different world. I'm turned 60 in March, and I was born in 1966. I was the beginning of, well, the way I think of it is, the generation before me was my Caribbean, mother and father. They came in on the ships and was encouraged to come to the UK in order to make their wealth. And really, they didn't know that they were really brought here to clean the streets, to clean the offices, and to do the kind of low end. Like
the Windrush generation.
Yeah, the Windrush generation. And that made me born from the Windrush generation, that made me like the first generation of really dense black kind of like youth kids going into the school system, which was essentially a white school system. And so growing up in Britain in the 1970s was really a hard journey. You know, racism was extreme. I can go down that road. Maybe that's a distraction. But we had very little opportunities, or we were discriminated against, and always I understood that like whatever I was going to do in life, I had to do it really well, but I had to choose early because survival was one of the main, well, it was the main factors of kind of like living as a black person in the 70s in Britain. You knew that you had to survive, so you had to choose well. Nobody thought that it was a good idea to become a dancer of all things. But the reason why I'm talking about that time in that way is because it was also just at the tail end of segregation in the US. And so literally black people everywhere was just getting used to the idea of not even of, I was very close to the segregated years, you know. And so my perception of the world was very much about the white world that I was living in. And so here I am doing this dance, and I see this thing called A Day at the Races. And I'm watching the movie, and they show me the classic clip that we know of, White is Lindy Hop's. And I'm watching the clip, but my assumptions, based on the time, was that these dances that look like jive to us British people, or the jitterbug if we saw Americans, which we associated with GIs and so on, and with white movies, you know, it was either Elvis or Bill Haley or Glenn Miller. There was no association to me with those art forms having anything whatsoever to do with black people. And so here I'm watching The Day at the Races, and at first my mind had just literally made the assumption that they were white dancers, that this was, you know, because I'm not used to seeing black people on film. And I'm halfway through it and feeling, well, this feels really quite natural to me. I'm watching these people and they're acting like, you know, like basically like family members. Day at the Races, to at least to me at the time, just looked like a regular party that I understood as a kid with growing up with my parents and uncles and aunts. It kind of looked the same, except for they were dancing much better than we did. And it suddenly occurred to me, wait, these are black people. And really, that's what put me on my journey, is the watching A Day at the Races made me wonder why I didn't know about this already. What was missing in my upbringing that I didn't know that black people did such cool things, that they did such positive things, and who were they? And I'm really kind of, I really, if you like, answered your question with too long an answer, because really to me, that's the defining point for me. It was the question, why don't I already know this? And how much more don't I know about black people that's positive as opposed to negative? You know, through the dance, I got to learn the history. I got to learn black history because we wasn't given that in school. So through the dance, I got to understand that there was a Rosa Parks, or that there was a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X, and that these people were struggling the same way I was struggling to deal with prejudice and hatred, and the effects of it. And so I wouldn't say that I embraced the dance. Is what I did is I embraced the potential that the dance could teach me about Black history. And beyond that, how I could then turn that back around to make sure that others understood that through these people, these Lindy Hoppers, these dancers, that they had the possibilities of uplifting many Black people who have a sense of no identity because they're often not shown images of the positive creativity of Black people. And so it became my mission to learn about the dance, but also to be able to share it so that others would also understand that this dance is something that belongs to the creativity of strong Black people, and that we are more than just the low-class images that are always being fed to us as to who we are. I have no idea whether I said any of that well.
There's a lot in there. I've taken notes that I would love to just dive into or just make a quick comment on. But of course, there's actually one topic that I would have liked to talk to you about, and it was why are there so few Black dancers within this Black American art form? And we can get back to that a bit later. But
Sure.
But one thing I'd like to point out was it seems that there was two things that that drove you to the dance, and one was, in fact, you made a connection to the dance because you saw Black people dancing. So one, but then there was another also aspect, and I think that's more related to your personal character, which is you said was the challenge of finding something you can't do. The challenge, because you found at first you were trying to, you said, I can't do this, and so and hence maybe through your character, you're like, then I want to do it even more. Is that part of your? Is that a part of a trait of yours?
Yeah, it's an upbringing trait. I was taught that in order to get ahead, you had to be 10 times better than the person next to you, and then you might be equal. And so I guess I was always driven to excel at whatever I did. And the problem with when you find yourself, and maybe it sounds like boasting, I have no idea, but I try to be truthful. When you're good at things, and I was good at a lot of things, not just physical, intellectual as well. When you're good at things, they do not appear to be difficult. Maybe sometime people should really interview more people who excel at whatever they do, be it a sport, be it like whatever they do, and really interview them for how difficult they find it to do. Because I've never found dance to be difficult after I climbed over that first hump of, oh, I didn't get this straight away. But my determination has always been that, like, there's always been a goal in front of my determinations. There's okay, I need to do this better than other people in order to survive. I can do this better than other people because I seem to be given a certain gift that allows me to excel in areas that, like, that I just seem to be able to do that. But given the gifts and the desire to move forwards through the sense of survival, there's always been for me also the end of, let's say, my character is always changing what I perceive to be wrong, for some sense of justice, I guess. And so I'll keep going and I'll keep going. And that's part of my character until I really understand what it is that I'm doing and excel to a point where I feel that I've passed people by a long standard.
My and absolutely, and I think that means the survival is a very is a strong drive, for stepping away from the status quo and from and out of survival, creating creativity. But also I do have a hot take on today's swing, and how it's taught, is that sometimes I feel that the dance is too watered down or too spoon fed, that we lose people that have that sense of drive for a challenge. And so you walk in, I know for a fact that when I walked into my first breaking class, first step is the first step that we learn is a 6-step. So you're down on all fours. It's tough, and then you got to do this complicated sequence of 6 steps, and and the teacher shows it to you, in the first few minutes, and then okay, I'll come back to you in 30 minutes, and you better have it. There's no spoon feeding, and it's in fact like that drive, especially when you're young. You're like, I got everything to prove to myself. I got it. I still. So you're still figuring things out, and you got plenty of energy. And I feel that anybody who would step in to an average Lindy Hop or jazz dance class, it would be almost a bit off-putting, because it's just too simplified. Because I would say the equivalent of learning to to do a 6-step, first of all, would be the equivalent. Okay, your first class Lindy Hop. Okay, here's a swing out.
Yeah,
it's almost that. Now, not to say whether that be the right way to go about things, but still, that's the kind of feeling I get. And it's like, yeah, it's going to look like crap for the next few months, but you're just going to keep doing it until it starts looking okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, education as we get it, as it's not just a modern day thing, as in today. Teaching is a profession that requires a teacher to actually have the skill of teaching. It doesn't matter what they're teaching, whether it's dance or whether it's kind of maths. There's still a skill to teaching itself that is trying to develop a result. You learn a difficult art form that requires a certain attitude towards its athleticism that will weed out anyone who is there to be essentially entertained. What I found in the Lindy community, which has a lot of young experience, let's call it teachers, instructors, is that there seems to be a base model, and I'll say seems to be because I'm speculating, if you like. There seems to be a base model that is based on the business itself, i.e. the popularity of gathering numbers of people to come into a room in order to teach them, but in order to build a business, essentially. And because they're focused on the business model, they're forgetting to some extent that there still also needs to be an understanding that you are actually passing knowledge, and there are ways to pass knowledge that develops people, and there are ways to pass knowledge just to sustain popularity. Going with simple often sustains popularity, because when we create difficulty, what we get people who give up, but we also get people who sustain, who have the character to keep pushing through the difficulty. Now, to me, what that means is it's what you're looking for as the end result. Is the end result your popularity and your building of your business model, or is the end result the development to create maybe the best dancers, the best dancer that you can create in a singular person? Well, if you're trying to create dancers, well, that you have to accept that you're going to have a ratio of dropouts who will not stay the course of being pushed to another level. And maybe what should be done is that we should be separating the popular class to away from the, let's call it the professional class, where people are trying to develop to improve themselves as dancers so that they actually can become that word, dancers. You know, there's a separate way of, there's a different way of thinking when that's the task. It will lose a certain bunch of people, but will gain a different crowd. We do a lot of popularity in Lindy Hop. That's why I think that we end up with simplified classes that don't challenge students. I also think there's one other mistake within all of that. There's the fear of losing students if you make things uncomfortable for them, which I think is a misplaced fear. Actually, if you explain to someone why you're putting them through something tough, they may well go through it if they understand the goal. If you're afraid of your students and you want to keep them happy all the time, you can achieve that goal, but you won't achieve the goal of also making them good at what they do. I think often this just points to a lack of experience in our instructors, mainly maybe because of youth and time, but also in their students, because we also have built within our Lindy culture the kind of students that thinks that excellence in teaching is going to be achieved according to whoever is the best dancers in the room. That for me has always been a mistake. There's a difference between great dancer and great teacher. Great teaching comes from experience, and it comes from actually the proof that you have produced good students. Because you can dance well doesn't necessarily mean that you can teach well. But organizations as well as students tend to run towards whoever is the better dancers rather than running towards those who might be the better teachers. And, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that issue has been brought up in many other communities, and not just the Lindy Hop, but for sure the particularity about the Lindy Hop is maybe indeed that it's very studio centric, and so indeed it lives through first and foremost having more students. And for that, you got to appeal to the most common denominator. I remember teaching a class, and the class that I enjoyed teaching the most were the ones where people signed up for a whole year or a whole semester.
Yeah.
So then you could go, well, they're all, first of all, I was just paid as the teacher, so it wasn't my school, but
Yeah.
I didn't feel like, okay, well, the school has already filled up their class. So for me, if there's a 15 to 20% dropout, it doesn't matter so much. But at least now I can push the dancers more than in any other situation, you know, because I don't have this urge to feel that I have to keep them, you know, from an economical standpoint. And then what happened is that, as you said, I think like by putting them out of comfort zone, they actually started to hold on even more and invest more time and take the dance a bit more seriously and get, you know, trigger the curiosity and be a bigger contributor overall on the long run. and I don't know. I feel that sometimes on the short term, like the long term gain is worth the short term gain in that situation. But of course, there's a place for everybody. I'm not saying that. I think there's other people who do a great job at trying to figure out what are the mechanics for keeping everybody in the class. But I know in the breaking classes, there were lots of dropouts. Like, there's no doubt about it. Yeah. But those who didn't drop out, my goodness, they would stick around for years to come and be a building block for the rest.
There's a sort of understanding that maybe I have right almost from the beginning. It's maybe the understanding of what dance is. Dance as a form is very much elitist in its kind of presentation. When we are honest about it, it has been designed to have an elitist structure. It's not made for everybody. It's certainly not the levels that actually move it forwards. Let's call them as art forms. That, like, if you're reaching the pinnacles of ballet or contemporary or any of the other art forms within the dance field, that you're always moving towards an elite group of people who do things beyond that of what the average person can do. That doesn't mean that it's not accessible to the average person. It's just that that's not its intended direction, let's say, its end goal. So you're always going to be tugging between whether you're pushing towards elitist art or whether you're moving towards popular kind of like acceptance of you can participate in this. And there's always room for both. And it makes, in my opinion, two kinds of maybe teacher: the ones that actually know how to sustain the middle ground for everybody, and those who actually have the goal of developing so that the art itself keeps growing through elitist structures. When you get to the pinnacle of hip-hop, breakdance, and whatever, you've got elite people who can do things that others just cannot. Doesn't stop you from participating, but you accept that that is also necessary. It's necessary so that you continue to create new ideas, that you continue to develop the art form itself. And maybe that's one of the important things to me to understand, is there's a difference between developing the art through elitism and developing the popular structures that everyone can participate in. If you can understand those two differences, then you can separate the way that you teach, so that you teach elitism to those who are able to embrace it, and you also teach the popular side of things that allows others to participate and maybe grow towards that elitist group or those elitist abilities, so that you can arrive at the destination that you're capable of as each individual. Because not everybody gets to the top, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't try.
If we look at the art form by itself, the art, would you say that is the contribution to growing the community, let's say the bottom line of things, the bottom of the pyramid, or would you say it's pushing elitism?
You're talking about where we are now?
Yeah, let's say. Or you could also look in the past and say, okay, who was it that actually made the art?
That's more a fair question. I think it's more a fair question when you move it to the past.
Yeah, let's move it to the past then. Yeah.
Well, the reason why I think it's more fair is because the present is a new beginning. Sometimes people talk about the thing that they call the revival. I call a resurgence. because some people dismiss that time. They say, well, things were still going, and I disagree with that description, because I understand you've gone off somewhere. I understand that I was there. I mean, I was literally there. I was there in the 80s. I'm literally part of the thing called the revival. What I know about it is what we did in that time is we built the infrastructure that everybody benefits from now. We did not recreate the dance, but we gave you the work and the swing camps and the dance companies and the platform to allow you to understand the name Frankie Manning, Norma Miller, Dawn Hampton, Sonny Allen, etc., etc. We were the people who built a structure that everyone benefits from now. But ours was a starting point where I feel like we were babies trying to piece together little bits of information that was given to almost like detectives, get the clues that would give us a new idea of how to do something where the chain had been broken in the way it was passed down. So we needed time to grow into being something that could be just considered even able to do the dance, let alone to be doing it at an elitist end. Now, if you go back in time and you talk about White is Lindy Hop's and Shorty Snowden and their development, well, they had nothing was impeding their development. They were the building block that made the dance and then elevated it to the point where it was professionally comparable and competed with the other art forms of that time, the tap dances, etc., which we know was done at an extreme high standard. There's a reason why even today I could still say that, like, I will still not find the couple who could outdance Frankie and Johnson in Hell's a Poppin'.
Yeah.
You're still not finding the gene pool that could deliver Hell's a Poppin' better than they could. We're still behind in that department, but it's understandable. They witnessed every night at the Savoy Ballroom. We haven't witnessed even one night at the Savoy Ballroom. They were within a culture where the music that we danced to on a recording was played live by the artist that we're dancing to on a recording. I don't know how much more you would be inspired if you've got the actual Duke Ellington playing for you one night and then Count Basie the next and then Chick Webb the next, etc. That was their environment. We have a long way to go to be in the right kind of soup, let's say, of all the correct ingredients happening all at the same time. The great singers, the great musicians, the great dancers. We're in a different kind of melting pot. I feel that, like, the dance has moved a long way, where physical ability is now I think moving more and more towards a higher elitist post. But you got to compare it with the dances that are also happening now. How do we compare to the very top break dancers? How do we compare to the very top ballet dancers? How do we compare to the very top tap dancers? That's how you got to value where our elitism is.
I'd say very low. It's very low.
Yes, but again, I will say that like Lindy Hop needs to be given a chance. It's still a baby because it's had to do its job a second time.
Yeah.
It hasn't just been a natural run from Frankie passing to the next generation, as a young person rather than a revival person or resurgence person. We have got to be given the time to catch up. It's almost like prejudice and racism itself. I am not a rich man because I was born a black man. My opportunities were reduced because of that. And so even if I'm given the opportunities now, I'm still in a position where I'm catching up with those who never had their privileges interrupted. And that to me is the same with the Lindy Hop as it stands now. It was interrupted. We had to start the process again. And so we're behind the rest of the world still who didn't have those interruptions.
I used to think that. And I think I don't given that the resurgence, as you call it, and I like that name of the Lindy Hop, happened in the late 80s. I mean, it was. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's not like as if in 10 years' time now it's going to be on the same level as breaking is today, and yet we would be on the same time scale. But I think there's also something maybe perhaps cultural. There could be like a fact that maybe the scene is indeed a lot less focused on competition. If I look at, for example, mambo and salsa, their community very, very competition centric, which also could be subject to criticism. I'm not talking about that, but that maybe that this elite form isn't pushed as high. In breaking, I would say that the social format is, our battles is a very integral part of the dance.
Sure.
But perhaps that's been less the case. And when I talk to people, even from your generation of dancing, there seemed to be that there was a bit more rivalry in the 90s or even early 2000s than there would have been today. Because
yeah.
You're smiling there. Yeah.
I never thought about that, but I could probably agree with that. Yeah, but when you make the comparison, you've got to remember there's a corporate reward that Lindy Hoppers don't get, and they didn't even get in their time. There's a corporate reward. Like hip hop has been, and breakdancing has been monetized, i.e. that like it presents the right kind of extremes, maybe through its competition mentality or whatever, to attract that which actually does make money. They used as the physical backdrop for music, pop stars, the music industry, for even now musicals, dance companies, films. It's a usable art that can be transferred to places that make big corporate money. Ballet is the same. Tap dancers always had that potential. Lindy Hop has it has certain what's the word I'm looking for? It has things that limit it. It's got limitations. And the limitations are really what I think hold it back from being like directly in the force of those the art forms that like are more kind of like, say, financially successful. And one of those things is its acknowledgement itself. It gets used, but it doesn't really get acknowledged. Like you you haven't seen, but like in this modern age, but one show, one theater piece that like is focused on this art form. And so it's not realistically something that is the backdrop for a pop singer or for like the structure that would be used for musicals, etc. And so it's kind of like, it's not flawed in the way the dance is done, it's just flawed in its appeal to popular systems that make basically money for corporate beings.
Yeah.
And so you do not get the same focus of people who want to come and learn it. If there's a reward, then you'll find more people who want to excel in that area. And so it's like we do not attract the most excellent people because there doesn't seem to be a financial reward that is significant to move them, or even a exposure reward. We expose, in many ways, Lindy Hoppers have learned to self-promote because there's no system there that is promoting them within the industries of show business, etc. We only touch the edges of show business, maybe a bit part in a music video, maybe somewhere that we are doing a basically walk-on role in a film.
Wartime
focus.
Yeah.
And since those focuses are always stereotyped to be nostalgic towards us just basically pretending that we're the dancers from the 1940s, well, then the art form has never been taken seriously as an art form. Therefore, it doesn't attract the serious dancers.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's also another huge factor is just that we have a hard time attracting young people. And so hence we get predominantly a lot of people who might have started dancing in their 20s or late 20s even, you know. But in any case, I probably...
But that might be generational again. Like, I remember I started when I was 18, and there was, in my time, we were young when we were doing this stuff. We're old guys now, but you'll find that like Leonard and the Rhythm Heart Shots and the dancers that were around then, we were young people. We have grown to be the elders, but we were young when we started. And it wasn't one of the things holding us back. Age was not a question of a reason. And it's very strange to also say it. There seemed to be more black people back then too. Like my dance companies were almost exclusively with black people. I had a lot of black dancers. What kind of, I think, killed it for a lot of them is not just the attraction of the dance, it's just the economics. You know, always come back to money. The only reason I could Lindy Hop in the first place is because I had to be good at it in order to even sustain doing it, because I certainly couldn't afford to do it as a student. I wouldn't have been able to afford to even indulge in the traveling and the so on and so forth, because the economics wouldn't be there, particularly for me as a black person. So there has to be, you have to be living a middle upper class life in order to afford the privilege of even being a Lindy Hopper. That is often not where you get the instincts for survival no matter what, because you have choice. You know, to me, excellence usually comes out of pain, and there's no bigger, let's say, motivator than having nothing. And I think now we have too much something in order to be motivated in the way that I think we were in maybe earlier generations. People want something to be given to them rather than they earn it. They want to earn it quickly so that they achieve their goals as fast as possible. And so sustaining the what I think of as the winning mentality is the patience of sustaining your intention, no matter what, on a daily basis, without the understanding that there's going to be a reward, with the idea that, like, if you just stick to the task, rewards will come. You're losing stuff on many levels is one that's also mental, as well as just like, why aren't all the good people here? I think that you become a good person or a great dancer, great anything, according to your mental kind of approach towards it. And you know, there's not enough adversity in the task of maybe your average Lindy Hopper these days.
Adversity. I'd like to move on to maybe another topic, and
Sure.
I'll open it with, I didn't know that judo was your background, but now it's
One of them.
all connected in my mind, because when I watch you Lindy Hop, in particular Lindy Hop, I've always seen, I was like, oh, it's like the way he does it. It looks like Aikido. It looks like a sort of a martial art. Has anybody told you that before?
Martial artists, yeah.
Yeah. And now I understand, okay, by the way you approached it from the very first day came from perhaps that perspective. But my other question is, like, who has been of strong or influence on your personal development, and you maybe even your style, your way of moving, and all the knowledge you've had? Who's been the most influential people for you?
Most influential. I've always watched bodies moving through space. I've never felt that, like, I've never felt like a Lindy Hopper per se. I don't call myself a Lindy Hopper. I call myself a jazz dancer, for one. And it's very difficult sometimes even hearing the term swing, because I think it's widely used maybe incorrectly. As I've understood it, certainly from Norma and other people like that, swing was the reference to the music, not to the dancing. The dancers were Lindy Hoppers, you know, jazz dancers, etc. And I've never felt fully that, like, that's all that I am. I've always watched dance as a subject, be it the ballet dancers, the contemporary dancers, whatever. Movement is what always interested me. And so when I was being influenced, it was different things that I was looking at. So a big influence for me is Fred Astaire. What I loved about Fred Astaire was economy of movement, that Fred didn't waste any movements, but he also didn't do anything spectacular that needed to prove that he was a dancer via the physicality alone. And so I've always been understood from him that I don't need to kick high. I don't need to throw a somersault. I can do some of those things, but it's not what makes it dancing. It just makes it physical, and it's like a trick. So Fred taught me to move away from the trick and to see a dancer, you know. And so he was always maybe one of my biggest influences. Then I would watch the Nicholas brothers, and it wasn't just their gymnastic ability, it was their panache. And these hands, the biggest influence for these hands is Fayard Nicholas. Fayard hands speak while he dances. So when he wants you to look at his feet, he'll point to his feet with his hands, and he'll show you what the foot is doing through his hand movements. Always dramatic, elaborate, and often beautiful. And I had a very similar long arms, big hands. And through him, I would say I was influenced to understand to use them.
Could you elaborate on that? Because I have a feel sometimes when I observe, I feel like the upper body and the hands and the power of intent in our movement is sometimes forgotten when trying to pass on jazz dance. So let's say you take Fred Astaire's style, or even if I look at somebody like Gene Kelly or Marie Bryant, when I see their hands, it looks like they would have been classically trained. And I remember asking Norma Miller and talking about Marie Bryant, and she said, oh, she was classically trained. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Does that mean she did ballet, or was that mean she learned in a studio? But it seems that the way that the hands are done, there's a lot of work put into that. And you're talking about the Nicholas brothers. Is this do you think this was worked on? Was this intentional? Was this
no, because you can look at them when they're like 5 and 9 or whatever, and they still have the same hands, you know. And these kids were raw as hell in those days. When they saw ballet dancers, they actually were impressed by their movements and would emulate that also. But there's a completeness to a jazz dancer when they're using their complete body, including the arms, and they're historically connected. I mean, like, I teach that in class. I let people know that, like, the arms of jazz are really the wings of a bird. And, you know, I'm very specific of that understanding. And to me, dance begins from the process of understanding how your arms move and how to make use of them as expression. Because after all, even when we speak and we speak with any kind of expression, we tend to start using these things called arms to finish that expression. To dance without your arms, like river dance, I guess, like an Irish dancer, sorry to say that, but like that to me is like removing one of the strongest tools in your box from any kind of dance.
I asked about that, and the idea is that it's in order so that you put more attention to the feet. But with that said, if you look at Sean-Nós dancing, which is the old way of dancing, Irish dancing, the hands are a lot more loose, and the river dance is already a modern interpretation of Irish dancing. Nevertheless, bracket closed. That's interesting. Let's say I look at Leon James, probably one of my favorite dancers. He does a lot of this jazz hands. Now, not the jazz hand style of Bob Fosse, but he likes to shake them and do these kind of things. What now that is the jazz hands has.
Now it's an uncomfortable term for me, jazz hands.
Yeah.
You know, it's a common term used, and it's one that like sometimes bothers, because like jazz hands really is a reference to those white-handed gloves that like are associated with the minstrelsy and the blackface era. And so be careful how we've kind of like indoctrinated this word jazz hands into our culture as if it's actually something that's cool rather than demeaning. And so I tend not to use the term jazz hands. It's not really the one that we should be using. But that aside, yes, Leon James expresses through his hand movements. You'll find all the greater dancers are usually associated with having great hands, right? You know, Fred Astaire, as you say, Leon James, even Michael Jackson, you'll be aware of, conscious of how he uses his hands. It's an important tool. To have it, let's say, classically trained, even as a way that Norma would describe classically trained, would be that, like, she'd be making references to using the port de bras and using the body as a ballet dancer would use it. And Marie Bryant was Pepsi Bethel's mentor, and Pepsi was very much into using even ballet terms when teaching vernacular jazz. In Pepsi's classes, he would say port de bras. He would go into first and second positions, and he was training the dancers through ballet terms. And so Pepsi, no doubt, might well have got that from Marie Bryant, because Pepsi delivered his stuff through a classical brain. And so I know when I learned things from Pepsi that I was understanding them via the language of the classically trained ballet dancer, as well as the vernacular jazz movement. He expressed himself that way, and I don't believe that they're separations. I believe that the two things are very much intertwined within the nature of jazz anyway.
Yeah. With that said, I would emphasize on the fact, when I watch Marie Bryant, that's not at all the first thing that comes across my mind. Is like, oh, she's quite classically trained, or she might have some reference to ballet. It's still, first and foremost, it almost, for me, it has more, when I look at it, it has more to do, if I were to put it on a spectrum, to a Black American social form like hip hop or something, than it does to ballet. For what do you think?
Yeah, but, like, you know, it's because of the poise. She has her shoulders down. It's the poise. I think you have to be looking at it from the eyes of someone who's existing in the same time, who doesn't have that kind of training, like a Norma Miller. She would see things differently. You know, it's funny. One of those credits, you'll see that, like you mentioned earlier, I did a movie called Idlewild, and this was a movie I did with the band Outkast. It was starring Andre 2000 and Big Boy, and Macy Gray, Patti LaBelle. There were all these different kind of like stars within this movie, and I was on set. I think we were in Wilmington, Carolina, for like four months, training and shooting this thing with what was the top break dancers and hip hop dancers of that time. They'd all just come out of a movie called You Got Served. And so I was working with, or dancing alongside, a guy called Flips Velez, a guy called Chopper, Ya. They were like kind of like cool names, actually. But they were the top break dancers, pop lockers, flexers, Adesla, in the world at the time. And they did a ballet bar, and all of them had classical training. Now, the first thing that surprised me was, like, I was expecting them to be, you know, my stereotypes of just street, but virtually all of them trained their bodies through doing their pliés and their techniques within their body, and still delivered the hip hop and breakdancing as you would expect from people who are at the top of that field, who came from like that street culture. So I think there's a misdirection. Movement is movement, and there are some levels of it that requires that you stay within the lane of what makes your culture feel right. But I think that you weaken the strength of what you do if you don't acknowledge the strength of other art forms that actually bring things that you can use within yours. I don't think classically trained is a separation. I think it's an addition that actually makes you do your, let's say, raw material even better with more weapons. Yeah.
My add-on question to that, and I'd like to get back to maybe some names that you drop later. If movement is movement,
Yeah.
what is jazz dance?
That's like an internal question, you know. I used to have a laugh thing that like I used to have with Dawn and actually Frankie and Chazz. We would laugh about this thing. And someone would ask them, you know, what makes a band swing? And their answer would be, well, it either does or it doesn't. And we would just fall about laughing because the people looked confused, because it was like you didn't answer the question, whereas we felt they absolutely answered the question. You know, what is jazz? Jazz is kind of like an instinct of what's right and what's wrong and what's not. In many ways, it's better to ask the question, what is not jazz? Because there is, you know, you can literally go, what, that doesn't feel right, or it doesn't look right. You don't have to define it so scientifically that it doesn't look right because of this, and this is jazz and this is not. It's more that like there is an essence to the energy of what jazz, when jazz makes sense, that you either understand that or you don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, well, you may grow to understand it. This doesn't make sense at all. But there's no guarantee that you'll ever get the difference. What I do know is jazz is not a codification that suggests that we all need to move towards sameness. Jazz is individuality in its essence and core. It seeks for you to run away from popular and to seek the corners of individualism. So when I look at the dance now, I see popular Lindy Hop, and it's trying to create a formula that can be passed to the next person, passed to the next person. And so we're becoming kind of samey. Even in our individuality, it's still samey. It's like the same energy, you know. And if you're looking at jazz of the past, you're looking at people trying to do the very opposite of that. How do I remain completely different to the person next to me while sustaining the idea of doing this thing that you recognize as jazz? I think jazz is the constant pursuit of the individual finding themselves. That's what jazz might be to me.
So some people will go as far as to say, well, everything is jazz if you're dancing to jazz music.
Oh, great. This is when your thing out.
Oh, I'll say that again. I say some people will argue that jazz dance is any type of movement that you would do to just jazz music.
Right.
Yeah. And then some people will argue that, okay, no, jazz is all in syncopated rhythm. And so there needs to be some rhythmical language first and foremost. And then others will push it further and say, well, jazz includes a series of foundational steps inherited from tap, Charleston, and social steps. It's sometimes hard to know where to navigate, because if we say, okay, well, jazz is, as you said, it's it's always in search of innovation, which I completely understand, then couldn't you say, well, what if I was the first person to bring? Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
One moment.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, 1 second. Sorry, you can't come in. I will be literally a moment.
No problem.
Just 1 moment.
Yeah. I'll be back a second, Ryan, myself.
One. Yeah.
Высота примерно от.
More. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think here. Yeah. So
then
like,
what?
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Alex.
All right, I'm back. So the
Sorry,
way
I'm back to.
yeah.
I've got in the way a little bit.
I was saying,
Sorry.
so on what's the definition of jazz dance, right?
Let's get back to it.
Yeah, the definition of jazz dance, and now to say, some people are going to go, oh, there's modern jazz, and then there's this style of jazz, there's Dunham jazz,
Yeah.
But if we talk about the jazz to which was mainly done through the era of swing, I would say, and even then, I'm already putting it into a block, which is probably not what we should be.
It's freezing again.
Hang on, just a sec. Yeah, maybe we just need to take some time for the. Let me know if you can hear me okay there, Ryan. Can you hear me okay? Because I can see you. I can see you loud and clear. Ryan, can you hear me okay? Ryan.
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. But
Right. Okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
All
It's working all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm talking right now.
Right. Brilliant.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to go on my.
But you can't hear me. Is that right?
I can hear you, but with a delay, and it's going to be quite frustrating, I think. But I'm just going to keep talking and get my point across. So, what I like to know is what's, from your perspective, the definition of jazz dance in the form that we are doing. I'm not talking about modern jazz, for cutting the Dunham style, or whether that be Bob Fosse style or whatever. I'm talking about the form in which we are mostly aspired to. And what is it that, if you were to try to explain it to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, and then even go on as far as define what your teaching program is going to be, in order them to bring them to bring them to that shape of, or that movement, how would you do it? In the same sense, I'm talking about if I were to teach somebody locking, Campbell locking,
Yeah.
what are the things, how would I would describe it, and what is it that would help them bring to that movement? And I think I would kind of know what to do, as I would do with breaking. I would know. But when it comes to jazz, somehow it's a mystery.
Yeah. It's not a mystery. It's just a wider subject than we appreciate. Let's put it that way. All right. At the bare core, if you're going to use the word jazz, try to really extend that word to what it actually means. Jazz to me means all movement, like all popular movement. Like hip hoppers are jazz dancers. They're derived from jazz. Their birthplace comes from that movement.
That's brilliant.
And so I'm like, if you're talking about all popular movement, think about it. In general, everything that you see that you enjoy, be it the tap dances, be it the jazz vernacular authentic dances, be it the hip hoppers and every flavor of the pop lockers and the disco dancers and et cetera, really they've all come from the same melting pot of jazz. And so since this is such a wide subject, why should we think that we can just narrow it down to a simple, this is how to see it? Because it represents almost everything that we do. What is the grain that sustains it, that we look for, and I think in the authenticity or the feeling of what's right, is the contribution of blackness that sits in the middle. And so defining jazz is like defining blackness. That's, to me, is like one of the tough parts of like getting used to the term of what jazz is. Jazz is the open expression of the pain of Black people and their joy. And that's why it's hard to touch, because it's the essence of someone's energy. We have markers that we agree upon eventually to accept as part of the description of that story. We find a step that everyone does, and we go, that step is the right step, it's the correct step. It's a step that could be found within the foundations of other dances, but when delivered with the Black essence, it makes sense to jazz. And so, for instance, the Shorty George, or the Fall Off the Log, or the Susie Q, we don't have too many disagreements that this is correct for jazz, and it's a jazz step. That doesn't mean that the movement itself hasn't been seen in other places, but somehow when interpreted within the essence of a Black body, it makes sense to this thing called jazz. And because it's part of a feeling, an essence of a culture, or of an expression of a culture called what I would call Blackness, rather than just the technicality of how the movement is just singly done. Because jazz becomes art, as it should be, when the essence of it is presented, not the step, but the person within the step, telling the story of jazz, which is the story of Black people. That's very hard to define.
No, and to be honest with you, I think everything you said is absolutely valid, and that by essence, indeed, jazz is always subject to more and more innovation, and even today, we you would call what even if there's no longer a shuffle in the music, or it's completely shifted to more like a hip hop rhythm, they would still call it jazz or jazz fusion, but because there are elements of essential elements that are related to what's being inherited from African movement, which is improvisation, for example, which is a heavy aspect of it, or the relating to in dance, for example, in dance form, the fact of imitating what surrounds us and the nature of things and stuff like that. And for me, like when I see popping, it's like this imitation of what was culturally popular at that time, which was robots and science fiction and Star Wars and stuff like that. And it's like, it's true, it's still eccentric dancing from jazz, but just in its later form, as with locking as well. And like when you look at the lockers from the 1970s, there's a lot of things that are tied to historic, and it's just like, well, that's just jazz dance, isn't it? You know, it's just another extension. And then when you look at it, I remember in the 2000s, there was a style that came about. Some people called it new style. And then they were doing stuff like the Harlem Shake, and it looks like a Shorty George, or you know, New Jack Swing in the 90s. It's all just Charleston steps and stuff like that. So it's interesting for me to think of it as, and sometimes I myself get into arguments with other people and myself, but always in this research of what is it that we would define? Why is it so hard? And yet, if I were to say, okay, this is breaking, and this is b-boying, b-girling culture, when it comes to, okay, what's jazz dance and what's jazz culture, is, oh my goodness, it's a nightmare. I got a question, Ryan, from a tap dancer.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Did you want to? Yeah.
Well, no, I'm like, to be fair, because when you're going into jazz, what's amazing about it is it was almost perfect in its inception, and we're trying to take a diamond and make it more of a diamond when it was already complete. See, you take a hip hop, breakdance, whatever, they're still, to me, evolving into another kind of diamond. But we've forgotten how we've actually just taken parts of this diamond, not realizing that it was a diamond to begin with. And what I mean by that is, okay, when you deal with the music itself, jazz music is in many ways more sophisticated on many more different levels than what the music that is delivered for breakdance and hip hop and disco, whatever. The layers are more sophisticated. And so we've actually made less out of those layers, and like hip hoppers they hit those beats, like they hit them, whereas jazz is weaving in and out of them. And so let's take that fact that something that came earlier can be more sophisticated than the things that followed it.
That's absolutely true. Oh, in terms of sophistication, in terms of rhythms, jazz music itself is an exploration of syncopations.
Yeah. So let's think that, like, in just in that thought, that maybe we're trying to find it and either add to it or be part of it, recognizing that it was in some ways complete at its inception. It was already a diamond. And we are experiencing the fragments of that diamond when we have all the things that we have now that's popular. And so we want to put it all back together again, which is why we find ourselves looking backwards for answers, because the diamond was there in the past. I know that, like, there is no answer to that question. There's only a striving to get closer and closer to what we can maybe agree collectively feels correct. And there's definitely a point where something can feel like it's wrong, or it's moving too much in a certain direction, like too much like trying to be the same. too much like trying to be perfect and therefore missing the point of art. Yeah, you know, sometimes even within the choices that I see made in other art forms like breakdancing and so on, is there's a sense of perfection that sometimes moves away from imperfection makes art. You know, just finding the hardest thing to do that appears to be impossible, if it's not moving the soul, what is its purpose? And I think that one of the things that drives jazz is it's always trying to move you rather than just to deliver to you physical energy. It's trying to move your emotions. And when I think it's lost is when it doesn't move you, when it stops seeking that as a design rather than seeking perfection as the ultimate layer that makes it correct. It's a complicated thing.
And Ryan, at the same time, if I were to ask you,
all right,
could you please teach me the 1920s Chicago jazz style?
I wouldn't know what the 1920s Chicago jazz style was.
One time you said, "Oh, that's the Chicago style." What was it? I remember it was in South Korea, and you said, "Oh, they're trying to do the Chicago."
Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember that.
I'll ask another. Okay, if I said, all right, I would like to do the that era 1930s style of or 1940s style of flash dancing.
Right. Yes.
You know, you would probably then narrow it down to something.
Yes, because it would be based on experiences that I've had with different dancers who could be credible as living through those eras. It would be the understanding that I've got from many different sources of the story of, you know, depending on whether the story of those people or the music that was being played at the time, the geography of where they were and what their stories are. I have to extrapolate from many different angles in order to come to get close to saying, well, that's from here and this is why they did it. But it will never be 100,000% correct,
of course,
because history is not transferable outside of the experience of being actually there.
Absolutely, 100%. And you know, and I could say the same exercise, like, hey, could you show me some soft shoe, traditional soft shoe? You say, oh yeah, well, okay, I can narrow it down, and it's these, and these are some traditional steps, and found, you know.
Yes, and usually it's supported by several things that like helps it to make sense, but just supports it. Like if you said to me soft shoe, I would say that I learned soft shoe from Pepsi Bethel, and so my soft shoe might be based on Pepsi's soft shoe, and I will still understand that Pepsi is an individual. Therefore, it's Pepsi's soft shoe, but Pepsi would have taken his information from other influences and sources, etc. So, and some of them would be an agreed upon center where this is a soft shoe step, like this is the time step, you know. And so a lot of the time you can find things that make sense because it's agreed upon across a wider base. And some things you have to narrow down, knowing that the wider base of the information of jazz was removed purposefully by white people who wanted to benefit from those stories, whilst not giving credit to where the stories came from. So there is the appropriation of the art forms and the movements and how they were done, which usually starts with erasure. So you don't know where that came from, and you don't know what it's called, or it's been given a new name, and you might not even know that it had been given a new name because it was given a new name outside of its cultural beginnings. So you're forever walking this tightrope of, is this the truth? Is this a lie? Is this made up by this person even who's told me this? It's a very difficult thing to navigate through jazz, because it's like giving gold back to the Africans. It's like you have to at some point admit that you took it all from them in the first place because it benefited you. But now they're not part of their own story. And so it's very difficult to then put together that story, because a lot of it was erased for the benefit of those who benefited from those art forms.
Perhaps that goes into our maybe other subject.
The tap dancer with a question.
Oh yeah. Okay. So if we could, yeah. So it had a tap dancer said, "Hey, what's the difference between tap dance and jazz dance?"
Tap is part of the jazz dance story. It's not a separation. It's the same thing. Tap dancers are jazz dancers. Lindy hoppers are jazz dancers. Like even if you're doing Dunham technique, or you're doing Alvin Ailey, you are still a jazz dancer. Hip hoppers are jazz dancers. They're not separate entities to this ideal thing called a jazz dancer. Jazz is the umbrella term for describing, if you like, rhythmical dance, rhythmical movement derived from the African diaspora.
What would then in that case, what would you call everything that we do that's not generating sound as a first intention? So like, for example, the Big Apple, the Tranky Do, or just you look at
we use the generic term jazz dancer for those things, but like that's a generic term. That's just for the experience of doing this thing that wasn't required in its day, education, but like they would have been defining themselves according to what they were doing. I know that like what we call jazz dance, some would have called the boogie woogie in its time.
Oh yeah. It was to a boogie woogie song, you mean, and they were just grooving.
Well, no. If you watch the right documentaries, you'll find that Sandra Gibson literally describes the movements of the show girl, either the chorus line girl or whatever, where you're getting a lot of what you call authentic jazz steps, right? Those dancers are called boogie woogie dancers. And so boogie woogie as a term is, again, music, not dancing. The boogie dancers that we have now, that is a construct of Sweden, is Germany. It's not necessarily associated at all with the music that's playing behind it. And so there was boogie woogie dancers who we now would call jazz dancers. And so that term already, again, appropriation, that term has been moved to white society and given an identity that actually is not correct for where it came from. And so jazz dancer is really anyone who's doing anything associated with jazz. Tap dancers are not some separate entity. In fact, they're part of, you have to go deeper into history. You have to go back a little bit further at the inception of jazz. And who is the father of jazz? Who is the father of tap for tap dancers?
Juba.
Master Juba. Who is the father of jazz for jazz dancers?
I wouldn't even say.
Juba, the same person.
Same person, yeah.
Yes, because he delivered both the solo dance, soft shoe, Irish jigging, dancing, twirling, tap dancing movement. He delivered all the things that we then have separated into all of these different stories of tap dancers and jazz dancers and Charleston dancers or buck and wing dancers, whatever you want to call them. They came from a same source. They are just different aspects of the same kind of dancer. In fact, you'll find that a jazz dancer is usually an exponent who can deliver all of the source material, including tap dancing. That's why I see myself as more of a jazz dancer, because I can tap Charleston, Lindy, and everything in between. You know, that to me is what makes a jazz dancer.
There was a when you it seems by the likes of it, those who were at the Savoy, and when you talk with the Sugar Sullivan and Barbara Billups, they're like, we did everything. They would go to their bebop nights, their mambo nights, whatever. Like they would say they would even do country dancing, dress up as cowboys and with cowboy hats on.
From my country dance days.
So line dancing, so just loads of. So it seemed to be very, very complete. And indeed, when I look at that generation that appear on the Spirit Moves documentary, and I look at Teddy Brand, for example, and he's doing mambo, and it looks absolutely incredible. And then he does a Charleston number, and it looks absolutely incredible. And at the same time, you see the overlap of those two things. So they're so close.
Yeah, because I think I said it. It's like when you're separating and you're seeing jazz as this fictitious idea of these steps, these movements, this idea only, then you're missing the point of what jazz dancers were. I said that, like, I see movement, and a jazz dancer will utilize what is presented to them as movement of the moment. It's exciting, to some extent, the direction that the dance is going, because of people like yourself who've come in, who see themselves as hip hoppers, as break dancers, whatever. And they are realizing that they can immediately kind of just infuse themselves to this stuff because it fits, because it comes from this. And so it's like you're coming home. And however, you have a different knowledge base that you're now applying to what is already here, therefore making another direction, as it's supposed to be. Always finding directions by drawing off of the source of what's around in the moment. To me, what we should be defining is what feels like good jazz and what feels like mediocre, not so good jazz, because arguably all jazz is correct, but some is just better than others. And so if you take from that point, is that, like, it's okay to draw from other sources, so long as you draw from other sources well. And it's almost necessary, because if we need to grow, we need to grow by acknowledging the things that are happening around you in the present, which is what has always been the case with jazz.
Yeah. There certainly does seem that there is some kind of flavor, or I don't know what we can call it, but something that will render something and look more jazzy.
Oh, you really have frozen there.
Oh, sorry. So I was. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah. So it's frozen on the live as well. So I think Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Are you back? Yeah. Hello. Yeah. No, I'm frozen. Am I? Hang on, just a sec.
Uh,
You can tell me when you can hear me.
now.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. I'll keep talking, shall I? Okay.
It's you've gone again.
I've gone.
It's okay. Where I am, where I'm located in this country, there is a lot of because of drone strikes overhead. You know.
Yeah. No worries. All right. So,
Oh,
uh,
you're back.
yeah, I lost what I was saying. Yeah, no, I was saying that. Yeah, if you had
There
seen
you've gone
me,
again.
yeah, just let me. Ryan. So yeah, I was saying if you could see me, if you could see me when I in my in my early days shifting from breaking into jazz, my groove was very staccato, was very you
Yes.
could tell I did not come from a jazz background whatsoever, and that takes a lot of effort, a lot of studying, and uh, a lot of work into kind of one removing that and transforming it and taking maybe some inspiration from our background but still rendering it more jazzy, whatever that means, more jazzy.
Yeah. If I ask a question, if you use the word jazz, when people want to be like more jazzy, if you want to call it that, all right, aren't they talking about being cool? Isn't it about being cool? That when something is delivered well in jazz, it's cool.
I think, are we going back full circle?
If I asked you to define the word cool, wouldn't that be as difficult as defining?
Well, that would, I think the word cool comes to an intricate to the intricacy of the definition of perhaps blackness too, and so we're coming full circle as to, okay, what does that mean? And what I don't know. Do you not think that's probably a trait or a quality that is searched, or not searched, but that is intricately tied to that culture? That
Yeah, well, because I think I think black people define the word cool. I think they made the word. It's they literally define themselves in that word. It's kind of like defining the word jazz. It's like it sits well on their coolness, their evocative nature. And so because like they gave you an opposite, they made the word square, it's like, so that you could almost put in your imagination the ways not to do it, right? Don't do it like a square. You got to be cool. Now, to me, it's like that's yet another one of its defining attributes that allows you to maybe see the differences even within the other art forms of jazz, like hip hop and breakdancing, is who's delivering it cool. Who is because when it's not right, even in those languages, because it's not cool. It's a defining part of its structure.
In breaking, we would use the word who has flavor.
Flavor.
Yeah,
same word.
Yeah, same. But indeed, cool is a jazz term after all, wasn't it? Wasn't it a sort of like a generational conflict of the younger ballroom attendees who would see their predecessors who enjoyed being the hot swing or hot jazz.
Right.
Did as with every generation, one generation thinks whatever the previous generation did sucks. So they would,
better.
we want to be, we don't want to, we're not hot, we're cool.
Yeah. Yeah, but still, even with any generation, it was always about being cool. Cool is about also projecting a lack of effort. That we don't have to try to do this; we just are.
Yeah.
You know,
my big brother, I would ask him when I was just a toddler. I'd be like, "Come on, tell me how can I be cool?" He said, "Well, if you're already asking, you're never going to be." You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like how to know if it's swinging. Exactly. So ultimately, it is a projection of not having to appear like you're putting in the effort. And so when you see people trying too hard, when they're trying to deliver their dance, that's where they stop looking cool. They look like they're trying. It's not effortless. One of the things that maybe I see as one of the compliments that I might get in my time is people describe me as it looks like it's so natural on him. He doesn't look like he's trying. And I think, well, then I've succeeded in something in jazz, because if it feels like it's effortless, despite all the effort involved, then I've achieved one of the tasks of becoming a true jazz dancer, which is to deliver with the sense of no effort. And maybe that's what you should be doing as jazz dancers, looking for singular formulas, but looking for goals of things to achieve within jazz that is far more complex than the one idea that will give you the complete story. One story is be cool. Two is emote from the soul, emote from the inside. Three is do your education and go back in history and study people, study their stories, study the why, study their movement. And that's just another thing to add to your jazz dancer vocabulary of growing. Three, acknowledge that you will always be growing and you will get to the finish line. And so stop looking for the finish line. And I'm like, so 5, be a fan of the dance and be a fan of yourself, so that you believe in what you do, because that will come out in your jazz. 6, jazz is for you. How you see it is what makes it correct. How the other person sees it is their jazz. Your jazz doesn't have to be the same, but it still acknowledges that it's still looking at its coolness, looking at going back to find stories of others in history, and looking not to try and be like your neighbor, trying not to be the same, etc. So there are rules within that where there are no rules, but at the same time, that search for yourself is maybe one of the key things on that list. And to me, there is 4 things on the list that I've mentioned, and all of them need to be addressed before you call yourself a true jazz dancer. So maybe we shouldn't look for the one idea or the 2. Maybe we should be looking for multiple things before we accept that we understand the language of jazz.
Well, Ryan, I think that's a beautiful.
Sorry, I stopped talking.
No. I think there's nothing more to add to that, and I think that was beautifully said. And I think that brings a lot of thought, probably more questions than answers, but and yet also not, because it's very clear where the dance should be steered, in my opinion. Now there was another thing, a topic that I would have liked to talk about, but we're not going to have time because we're going to have to wrap it up here. But it was indeed like one of the reasons why it is that there's such a lack of diversity, and I mean by that of Black people in this dance scene, and yet it's a Black art form. So perhaps we could talk about that another time, because I think we did in some way talk about it a little bit. But what do you? Yeah, it's up to you, Ryan. We can close it here, or we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it could be another long topic, I would say. So I think this could easily go on for another 30 minutes. So maybe we can say this is the first of a series. Who knows, Ryan? This type of discussion.
Well, I mean, why not? Why not? There is always a lot to talk about when it comes to these subjects, and my story aside, jazz is a massive subject, and how we interact with it. I mean, today we have a significant growing force of Black people who want to do this dance. Black people who are starting to excel at it, and so on, and it's growing in number. But we have to sort of look at society in general and see that, like, it's not moving as fast as the white community that's also benefiting from the same source, but it's almost exclusively always been the case of that. We are getting more Black people into the art form, just not at the same speed as we're gaining more white people. There is lots of things to be done, but like, in all honesty, it's still the same tropes. It's still economics. It's still education. It's still not seeing enough faces that look like ours in the more prominent positions. Even though we still reach high points, there's just maybe not enough, but there's almost never gonna be. I don't think we'll ever be satisfied in a strange way too. People are looking for a cure. How do we bring more people in? How do we bring more Black people in? One, be satisfied with the idea that that goal has already been achieved. There are more Black people. And so just keep representing. The ones that are here, represent with knowledge and with respect, but own your craft. It's a very hard thing to say, but we applaud excellence. We gravitate towards that which is the best. So gravitate towards making yourselves the best, and the people will eventually follow. It's about our hard work as the ones that stand here as statesmen and women, or statespeople, I don't know what's the correct term these days, to just hold our heads up and be examples. Then hopefully others would start to follow, and just be consistent in staying there in the task of working to just be representative by example. I tell stories all the time about the history of the dance. Generally, it's two white faces some black faces have appeared, and they're grateful to see people like me standing there telling those stories. I cannot make a concoction that just brings black people into the room. They will come when they want to. And they will want to because you're there in that room. Just stay in the room so that once those people do arrive, that they see you there. You know, there's a lot to be said on this particular subject, and it's a shame we maybe started it near the end, because we can talk about how we conduct ourselves as the black representation of the Lindy Hop here and today, and how that's affected by the more predominant society, and how we also can affect ourselves by making choices that might be right or wrong. I have no idea, but I think that that's someone's watch ringing. 1 second. That's funny. That's real. My son's watch just rang. Yeah. Our community is a community. The only thing that I would add to all of that is, are we searching for something in the world in general that is something that we might like as a future, where we actually connect and try to be something that is accessible to everyone? Do we have to acknowledge that there are predominant people in society that we live in that actually dominate in numbers and also in their resourcefulness because of the privileges that they have? But does that mean that we separate, or that we force people to acknowledge that, like, this is a black art form, and that, like, some sense of it should have ownership in the direction of black people? Well, those are things to discuss. But from my point of view, is that Lindy Hop is an art form most powerfully expressed in its time through the body and essence of blackness. It is its central core idea, as it is, but at its central core, it was always sharing that space to allow others to embrace it also. And it has always been the case right from the beginning. Fred Astaire walked around in the same era as the early jazz dancers. They were embracing of the same energy and therefore bouncing off of each other to create different parts of it. There is a black central core to what makes jazz cool, but it's not in full ownership of just the black community. Jazz has been contributed to by many different sources, whether we like it or not. And because it's representative of all the different sources, it's in some ways why it's so globally attractive, because it's a globe. Jazz was made for everybody on the planet, not for a singular individual or a singular culture. It's just expressed greatly from its source, which happens to be blackness. Its future is that convergence where all cultures are able to do it and express it at its peaks, where they also contribute their things to it. It doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to itself. It's art. And within that art, there is a need to have representation that is fair. And black people do not have fair representation. To bring them back is to give them doors to let it be fair for them to also participate in that which is born from their expression. so their expression never dies within it. That's the difficult balancing point, because it's difficult to create utopia on a planet that doesn't know how to exist outside of the borders of just being human beings connected together, let alone human beings dancing a dance called Lindy Hop. And I'll sort of stop there because I'm out of time.
And I'm aware well of your time, Ryan, and I really appreciate you just pushing it a little bit. We've been chatting for over 2 hours. It's been, every time I have a discussion with you, it's absolutely eye-opening. I really appreciate it, and I really hope that maybe we can do a few more of these, because I think there's so much to say still, so much to say, so much.
Yeah.
But thanks a million, and yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Take care of yourself. All the best. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.